Much is made in marketing material for our smartphones of them, fitting in with our life goals, merging seamlessly with our feelings, becoming an organic part of our very self. You know the promos I'm talking about. And it's true that the Android part of this, the Huawei Ascend P6, is as fluid, as flexible, as intuitive as any other smartphone on the market. It even fits in seamlessly with most people's budgets, coming at just over £300. However, as with the Sony Xperia Z at the start of the year, it's hard to think of this hardware as fitting into any human's lifestyle. It's beautifully thin, agreed, and well, beautifully beautiful. But every one of the large edges is sharp, ridged and somewhat, well, inorganic. The idea is that the ridges protect the fragile glass front and the scratchable aluminium back, but in practice the P6 ends up as a slice of technology that you're unlikely to want to, well, keep fondling. I thought that seamless glass chassis transitions had been mastered in 2013. The root of this particular design is unashamedly iPhone 5 based, but Huawei haven't quite pulled it off. But enough negativity. Your first 24 hours with the Ascend P6 will be filled with pleasant surprises. For the money, it's a decently fast Android smartphone with plenty of RAM, a gorgeous screen indoors, easily good enough camera and speaker, plus the unique selling point here, Emotion UI. Now, I'm no huge fan of Android skins, but I can absolutely see what Huawei is trying to do here. Having long been annoyed at the layers built into stock Android, i.e. home screens with lots of shortcuts and an app drawer with lots of shortcuts, including those on the home screens. Emotion UI here does away with the Android app drawer completely. Yes, you heard that right. Thinking laterally and quite possibly with iOS's upfront pages of app shortcuts and folders as a model, Emotion UI parcels all application shortcuts onto one home screen. You can drag and drop app shortcuts as needed, of course, and new apps get added to the next home screen along, from where you can organize them, etc. Surprisingly, the system works very well indeed, well enough that you have to wonder why stock Android makes things more complicated than it needs to be. Emotion UI also scores with complete themability, Symbian style, plus some also Symbian-like, very detailed permission manager, power manager, and profiles utilities. Hey, it's iOS meets Symbian meets Android meets Migo. There are no physical Android controls here, just the virtual on-screen ones, which work well as usual, though with the slight hit on-screen real estate. However, on the subject of screens, there's a huge gotcha in the Ascend P6. Huge. When you go outside, the screen shows Huawei's relative lack of screen investment by essentially turning into a mirror. The biggest impact of this isn't at home or in the office or even on a train, where you'll have no problems. It's when in the open air, and especially when trying to use the P6's otherwise adequate 8-megapixel camera. How can you tell what you're focusing on, what you're shooting, or even where the shutter icon is when you can't see a blinking thing? So you end up guessing where the subject is, guessing where the shutter icon is, and missing it because you can't see it, ending up hitting the home button, and you're back to square one, the camera's exited. Gah! This is 1080p sample stereo video capture on the Ascend P6. No real autofocus, I have to keep re-tapping on the screen. And again, there's the screen visibility problem in sunset. I've got this on the maximum brightness to try and compensate. So altogether, complications abound on the P6's video capture front. Back indoors again, time for some music. Your biggest challenge here will be finding the P6's headphone socket. Turns out it's that small metal button on the phone's bottom left. Here's the procedure should you want to do it. You spend ages picking at the little button with your finger until it comes away, revealing that it also houses after you've dropped it and picked up, a pin for extracting the micro SIM and micro SD cards from the P6's right-hand edge. You then plug in your headphones and enjoy playback. Afterwards, you realise you can't find the jack or pin and then spend 10 minutes ransacking your pockets. Finally, you accept the fact that it's lost. Your P6 now has an always accessible 3.5mm socket and you get on with your life, only much happier. Oh, and if you do need to get a card out, any 1 cent or 1 penny paperclip will do just nicely. The location of wired sockets here is always a little controversial. It's just so with the P6. A micro USB port on the top and a headphone socket on the bottom side are possibly the worst and least convenient of all the possibilities for users. Maybe that 6mm thickness dictated this particular positioning, but it's not ideal. Back to the general smartphone experience, text input here defaults to Huawei's own keyboard. But I honestly don't know why manufacturers bother. The very first thing I did was switch this back to the standard Android keyboard, the Jelly Bean 4.2 keyboard, which is universally recognised as excellent and which is actually supplied here out of the box in the firmware. There we go. Huawei's version claims to autocorrect text and simply doesn't. All the core smartphone applications here have been tweaked by Huawei, but the Jelly Bean design language is largely adhered to and everything's recognisable. Thankfully, there are no Samsung or HTC style upselling attempts in terms of a manufacturer-run content store, but there's still the usual duplication of Android web browsers, i.e. including Chrome. Supplied licensed applications here include Riptide GP, a very good jet ski racing game, the full editing version of Polaris Office, yay, AccuWeather and Flashlight, plus a client for Bitcasa, yet another cloud storage service with 20 gigabytes free for Ascend users. Media is taken care of with a tweaked version of Gallery, not only acting as a front end for your photos and videos, movies, but also with tabs to sort everything according to time and date, location, and or tagged people. Special mention should also be made of the excellent video codec support here, with even my old FLV flash video files playing perfectly, plus movies look great, indoors at least. With the virtual Android controls disappearing after a few seconds to give maximum screen real estate for the video content. Sounds decent too. With Dolby Digital Plus enhancement on by default. This is intended for use over headphones, but as you can hear, adds a little extra punch over the built-in speaker. Music contains another case of duplication with a Huawei-written music player replete with mood filters, though curiously, even the tracks supplied in the firmware don't have moods assigned, let alone your other 10,000 tracks. Plus the ubiquitous Google Play Music, of course, which handles local tracks plus your music library in Google's cloud. Nice to have the choice, I guess. One thing you'll notice straight away when playing media, videos especially, is that the P6 gets very warm just here. Even in Power Manager's default smart setting, the back right-hand side of the P6 regularly got quite hot, with the device's metal back and your own hand then acting as a huge heat sink. The Huawei P6 is most definitely not an Android flagship. The screen visibility outdoors is unforgivable and a cost-cutting measure too far, while the processor heat issues should have been sorted out properly internally with better engineering rather than simply dumping heat out through the phone's back. A little less trying to copy iPhone styling and a little more attention to engineering might have helped here, Huawei. The P6 is still your best smartphone to date. I admire your UI ideas, but you're in the big league now. At this price point, you've got to get all areas of the modern smartphone nailed down rather than just most of them. The Ascend P6. There was an interesting post over on coolsmartphone.com a week ago bemoaning the fact that most flagship phones these days seem to be dominated by their camera functions and pointing out this is just one part of the overall smartphone experience. You know, I sympathise with this point of view. After all, at the launch of this, the Lumia 1020, Nokia didn't even use the word smartphone or the phrase Windows Phone until half an hour into the presentation. It was all about the camera. Yet, while I sympathise with those who aren't snap happy, it's really impossible to talk about the 1020 without centering on the camera. Not because the camera dominates the interface or even the form factor, far from it. In fact, it's remarkably slim looking considering, but because almost everything else about the device has been seen before in this, the Lumia 925. CBD super sensitive AMOLED screen with Nokia Glance always on clock? Check. Dual core 1.5 gig processor and the latest Windows Phone 8? Check. All the other usual Nokia software goodies? Check, check. Now, although I haven't reviewed the 925 specifically on the phone show, there's much that this has in common with the Lumia 920, which I've featured ad infinitum, and so on down the line. But unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have heard about the camera in the Lumia 1020, now shooting this short segment. And yes, I can hear that hiss. I wonder if Nokia We'll fix it in an update, promising to bring the best of the sumptuous Nokia 808 that normally shoots each phone show segment, but rooted in a slimmer form factor and running the much newer Windows Phone OS. And here's the result, with a camera island that's only a couple of millimeters proud of the surrounding polycarbonate and rather smoothly contoured. I'd say it's up with the 808 in design terms. Well, apart from the shocking yellow colour, I've got to get myself a white or a black one. In fact, it's so relatively thin that I couldn't really work out how Nokia had managed this magic trick until I started digging into the specs. You see, although the headline figure of a 41 megapixel sensor remains the same, this is a totally new and smaller camera unit with every single aspect re-engineered. The sensor's 50% smaller by area, but is backside illuminated, making better use of light falling into it. The 6-element lens assembly is also mounted on a barrel shift OIS mechanism, optical image stabilization, as on the 920. This is a more heavy-duty mechanism, though. Apparently the lenses sit in a cradle of ball bearings, I kid you not, but still driven according to gyro and accelerometer input. And instead of a custom image processor, as on the 808 to handle the billion pixels per second, the 1020 has a fast enough system-on-a-chip and main processor, plus a whopping 2 gigabytes of RAM. A lot for a Windows phone, that all the pure view oversampling can be done in the main silicon. Crucially, this also means the whole imaging process can be managed in software. So for example, where on the Nokia 808 or indeed any traditional camera or camera phone, you'd spot a subject, frame it, zoom in a bit and then take your shot and end up with a single fixed JPEG. Here on the 1020 you can do the same, but then later you wish you'd framed it differently or want to change the main subject even, and you can do exactly this as shown here. Now this is possible for two reasons. One, as I said earlier, everything's under software control now, and two, the Lumia 1020 has a trick up its sleeve. Whatever you shoot, there's a full resolution 38 megapixel raw 10 megabyte plus original captured at the same time, partly explaining the 2-second shot-to-shot saving time. Thus, as my friend Rafe puts it, your photo is effectively a live photo in that what you see at any one time is your chosen 5 megapixel view of the original. At any point you can choose to reframe it, pan it, zoom it and even rotate it. Then it's set until the next time you fiddle. And each time the 5 megapixel version is oversampled from scratch from the underlying raw version, thus live, as in what you see isn't fixed in stone after capture. Now I know what you're going to ask, can you take multiple shots from the original, trying out different framings or zooms or subjects? Yes and no. Yes, in that after reframing you can share the result across social networks or email or, as we'll see, SkyDrive. No, in that having reframed again you've lost your original reframing choice. You get one live view onto the underlying 38 megapixel image and that's your lot. But sharing as you go, or if you're canny, auto-uploading your 5 megapixel reframes to SkyDrive, you'll quickly get into a rhythm where most, if not all, of your efforts are actually saved. And at any time you can just reframe again, like we did last, and let's not go there. You're also going to ask whether you can get at the raw 38 megapixel JPEGs. Well, yes you can, but only by plugging into a desktop at the moment. I'm sure some third party will bring out a suitable backup tool. This 1020 even comes with specific AT&T hooks to do this for customers in America, so it is possible. Results are, on the whole, as good as those from the Nokia 808, which is a very high compliment, though with the change of guard in Nokia's imaging department, there's a very different set of choices in terms of image processing. Gone is the minimal processing and ultra-neutral colours from the N8 and 808. In is sharpening and colour enhancement. Think Apple or Samsung style and you'll get the idea. Yet with Nokia's underlying quality and this rather unique reframing and oversampling system. You'll have noticed that, joy of joys, the Lumia 1020 has retained the 808's superb xenon flash, meaning that evening shots down the pub or at a party or of your kids are crisp and detailed, rather than the usual blurry phone shot messes. Hooray. Finally, on the camera front, video capture is at 1080p and stabilised in the same way as on the 920, so effectively very decent indeed. Look, I've only got the Lumia 1020 for a few days. This thing's not even released outside of the USA for many weeks yet, and I don't want to claim that I can review a device of this stature properly in that time. Hence, this is a first look only. There are multiple camera apps here just to complicate things, plus lots of Nokia extras and the Windows Phone ecosystem that's arguably full enough now for anyone. My plan is to revisit the Lumia 1020 in more depth once I have a long-term, full European retail device. It's at that point that I'll be able to judge it properly as a fully rounded smartphone. You want the full Steve verdict on the 1020? You're going to have to wait till September. Bye for now.